Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. All right. Well, I think we'll get started. I am Kathy Lancaster. I am the Youth Services Coordinator at the Library of Michigan. I'm excited to have Carrie Rogers-Whitehead here with us today. She's bringing us Managing Your Library's After-School Crowd. Thanks to the support to the Institute of Museum and Library Services. We're so happy to have Carrie with us today. We're going to ask that everyone feel free to put your questions in the chat. I'll be monitoring it, and Carrie will be trying to address those questions throughout her presentation. So um, Carrie, super excited to have you here today, and I'll let you get started.
No, thank you, Kathy, and I'll watch for the chat, and I will give some time maybe at the end. Kathy, we can maybe take off the mics if you have something you want to dive in deeper, because I know this is a topic that, I'm hearing from Kathy, I've heard from other people, it affects lots of you. I when I went to library school, I had absolutely no training on what to do with a lot of teen behavior and after school behavior. So this was been thrown into the fire with all of this. But I have a mix of research and experiences that I hope I can help you with. I understand every library is different. What works in one place, it doesn't work in another place. Your kids are all different. They're dealing with different things. So I love to hear from you. So if we're going through, if you have suggestions or things that you've done or also questions, please put them in there because I know I learned a lot from other librarians. I learned from law enforcement. I learned from social workers. I learned from a lot from other people on how to handle this. So I hope we can teach each other there. Oh yeah, and Kathy, just put the slides in so you'll have references, some books if you want to read, if you want to dive in more on this. We're going to start with that research, referencing with some of those books, is trying to understand where their brains are. Because we're old people according to them, and as my teenager says, sometimes cringe. So trying to get ourselves in the head of a teen brain of why they do what they do, and understanding the why can help us be a little more patient and empathetic as we work to de-escalate that behavior. So I'm going to talk about some communication techniques and actually step-by-step suggestions based on dozens of kids I've clicked out over the years on how do we ask someone to leave the library. I also never had a class on that in library school. Then we're going to spend a little time on policy and guidelines, and this might not, every library has their own policies and guidelines, but maybe some suggestions for trying to manage teen behavior. I have a little bit of time on partners and programs, and then we'll leave that time at the end. So happy to dive in with this. I work a lot with teens. My job is over teen services for my library system. I still work a lot with teens around technology and internet safety now. In juvenile detention centers, in with all sorts of different populations. I have a teen at home myself. I love teens. I love this age, but I know with this age comes a lot of different things. So I do a lot of teaching and working directly with partners and parents and librarians and teachers. These are some of the books I've written. I've written two books for librarians just specifically on teens. I do a lot of work with the kids on the spectrum, and I get geeky. So if you want to dive in more on that. But I want to spend some time on this one, teen developmental stages and behavior, because like we can't, it's frustrating. We get a lot of burnout. It can be hard. I have been called a number of names over the years, and it's sometimes hard to to feel it. So it helps you step back a little bit and kind of look at it from a bit of a distance of like, okay, this isn't about me. This is where they are. And this is also understanding where their brains are helps us set better policies because what works in one situation with a different age group might not work with these kids because of just where their brains are. And we might not remember everything, but at this time, it's just a critical time, which is why I love working with teens because sometimes they're so direct and they tell you exactly to your face how they feel, and I kind of love that in some ways because we do it we're different as adults, but they're just their gas pedal is on, as you can say, the emotional centers of their brains are more developed than their decision-making part of their brains. The brake is not fully developed here too. But so often we kind of have these expectations that aren't necessarily matching where their brains are because of that disconnect between the emotional and decision-making process. So They are like they have this meter. They can pick up tiny nuance in tone, in the nonverbal expression. They read emotions into interactions. They are kind of more advanced here, but they don't have that backup generator to understand maybe the wisdom of experiences and some nuance to all of it there too. When I was presenting this just the other month with some librarians, I had some of them tell me that, like, actually, well, they're finding more research. It's like 26 or 27 that the brain has finished developing. I don't know the exact date, but we do know that there's that lag. They're not fully there. And I work a lot with like juvenile offenders, and we have different laws based around those offenses at those age because we do recognize their brains are a little bit different. So it is hard, and you're going to deal with different things, especially with our tween age, our middle schoolers versus our high schoolers. You're going to see that change in brain development, and it's something to keep in mind as we're communicating and working with them too. So this is hard. We all of us have diminished cognitive performance during high emotions. Our brain kind of goes out the window. We step on that gas, and we don't necessarily think through these things. So when I talk about de-escalation, I want to acknowledge that this is hard and also because of our how our brains react. It's hard when we're in that emotional state. And it's hard for our teens when they're in a heightened emotional state to follow library rules and policies. I'm not saying that this is not an excuse. This is an explanation. I'm not excusing the behavior, so keeping that in mind, but just having a little empathy. So with that teen brain, we have this situation where we have peer pressure going on. This is roughly the age 10 to 14 is like when it's at its highest. So this is prime middle school age, and maybe you remember those days. You think everyone's looking at you. When you reflect as an adult, you're like, actually, they were just thinking everyone else was looking at them. They weren't looking at me like I thought they were. But it is a high degree of peer influence, and this is developmentally appropriate, right? We're getting moving out of the nest here. We're getting our own independence. We're learning who we are. It is normal and appropriate for kids to kind of push up against authority and want to be around their peers and be highly influenced by their peers. You might see this in library programming. One kid says something, the other one echoes it. They all saying it. It's very funny. I've done some activities around like how do we react to media with teens, and I remember one teen wrote like yeet, and then I had all yeet responses that day. It was all yeet all the time because they just kind of mimic each other a lot. And these group dynamics are really important to keep in mind when we are talking about de-escalation and policy because they're not going to respond the same way as maybe an adult who doesn't care as much what people think around them. So that's something to keep in mind. And when we are asking someone to leave, which we'll talk in more detail, it is easier to just ask the group. And I know you might be like, well, that's not fair. And trust me, I've had teens say, well, that's not fair. I didn't do it. But there's also an element of like, if you are hanging out repeatedly with people who are constantly breaking the library rules and policies, you are putting yourselves in the situation and there's consequences for that. And maybe you have to leave during the day. So when I work with teens in terms of like de-escalating, I really try to keep that group dynamic in mind because it looks really cool for them to stand up to me in front of their friends. Like they might have like a it's almost like a code of honor, or they have to retaliate when they want to look a certain way. So keep that in mind. Recognize that they might also engage in some of those risky behaviors because of that desire to hold out in group dynamics. We had an issue. We had like a retaining wall around our library, and the kids just would just jump off of it just for fun. Like see how far we can jump off the retaining wall onto the dirt. And it wasn't like 6 feet, it was like 4 or 5 feet, but still, it was a good distance. And so we would be like, don't jump off the wall. I didn't think I'd have to say that all the time, but yes, I did. And they kept doing it because one person did it, one person did it, one person did it. Finally, one of the kids broke something. We had to get an ambulance. It was the whole thing that was going on that day. And that was finally what kind of broke the spell with that group of teens is they actually could see the consequences of that actions. But that group peer pressure of jumping off the wall over and over again overrode any sense of safety or long-term decision making. And this is also difficult to kind of work with them. And when I try to de-escalate behavior around teens, I try to activate that. I try to activate that empathy, that looking outside themselves, because their brains literally struggle with that. This myelin and what we have in our brains connect nerve cells. It helps that communication between them. And when we're lacking some of that, it just doesn't, we're not seeing other people around us the same way. We're very, very focused on ourselves. There's that high concern about what peers think of themselves. So that's why logic doesn't necessarily work. Like, don't jump off the wall is a logical thing to say, but they're not looking at that same way. They're feeling this emotional piece. Well, I care more about this looking this way or feeling this way than actually maybe a longer term safety piece. So they can kind of appear a bit selfish. So when I talk to teens, if I'm like, hey, remember that time that kid broke their leg and the ambulance had, and then they had to miss their that fun activity. That might make more sense to help them than like don't jump off the wall. When if I'm talking to teens in terms of like they're being noisier, I might have to say, hey, look at that mom over there that's reading to her child. When you talk louder, they can't, this is a space for everyone and the child can't hear. Do you see that person applying for that job? Do you see that person that's quietly reading in the corner there? Your voice is taking up this extra space. So I try to activate, like, there's other people around you. There's a lot larger world here because their brains struggle to kind of make those connections outside themselves. So to kind of summarize some of these pieces, these group dynamics, this peer pressure, where they are in their brain, where they are in their brains, is that giving them time to transition, they are in a highly emotional state of energy. And I'm not even going into hormones at this time. That's happening as well. And so they might need some time to transition. They might go like at a 0 to 60. You're like, whoa, where did that come from? That was really strong response because they're just kind of like a little live wire where their brains are as well. Do not shame them in front of their friends. They will be forced, they will be feel like they are being forced to respond, and it might escalate even more because if you push on them, so discipline the entire group or take them away in private. And try to make any discipline short because that long-term decision making they struggle with. 2 weeks for them is like a long, long time. They're kind of like living in the moment day by day. And so make it, we're kicking you out for the day. We'll talk about some situations where maybe you need to do that more, but most of all, let's make the discipline short and immediate and consistent on how we apply it. Tough stuff, but let's talk about how we do it. And as Kathy said, feel free to put any comments or thoughts on this in the chat. We'll also have that time for chat at the end. So we've got some live wires with hormones and all sorts of things going on at this interesting stage in their life. So how do we take it down a notch? I'm not De-escalation isn't necessarily about making a quiet place. It's about making it so it doesn't burn out of control. It's trying to keep it at a simmer instead of the pot boiling over. So we'll talk about some specific techniques to do it. If I suggest if you can role play or practice with these because we get in that emotional state as well, and sometimes we forget what to say and we just react. We don't think, we don't take a step ahead, and then later at night you're like, oh, I should have said this, I should have said this. That's why it is kind of helpful sometimes to like have some things in your back pocket or to practice the de-escalation techniques. So I learned this from law enforcement. We had officers after school a lot of the days because we had issues of gang activity and other things going on. And so they taught me a little bit of this. We also had officers there as a partnership to help create more trust in the community with law enforcement in general. So there'd be maybe reporting or things going on because they would only see the cops as in a negative light. So the cops would come and like play chess and checkers with them or hang out. And we had one really great officer. His name was Hank, and they loved him. And he was just there for a few years and really kind of helped create that bond. And Hank taught me some things. So these are some things around de-escalation. They call it it's term verbal judo. It's like a gentle approach to help de-escalate that conflict. As I noted on the slide, you're not going to do this with a 3-year-old. They're not, that's not going to necessarily work if they're very mentally ill. This is not necessarily a technique that you can use in that situation. We had homeless at our library, and so that was also something difficult to do with like some mentally ill behaviors. But it is a way to kind of try to take the temperature down. And a lot of it is just like that listening and that empathy piece. When I say empathy, that's different than sympathy. I don't have to approve of the behavior, but I can have for an empathetic sentence that I recognize that you're having a bad day. I'm not saying that just because you have a bad day, you should be able to get away with this and treat someone like this. It's more like acknowledging that sometimes life is hard. And just having that empathetic statement, and I'll share some of those, can help de-escalate things. Understanding where their brains are, they're dealing with a lot of stuff, they're feeling maybe a lot of peer pressure, a lot of expectations, things may be going on outside your control. Just having that step back can really help de-escalate the situation because you have to kind of be that strong barrier, that calming presence. If you go high, they're going to go high too. But it does help us calm down a bit. And so often we maybe try to fix the problem or we go in as like judge, jury, and executioner, like I'm going to resolve this right now. But sometimes all you need to do is like listen, and just that listening piece can help bring it down a little bit more. This is something I have actually worked on personally because sometimes I apologize too much. I apologize for things that aren't my fault. I found myself apologizing to ChatGPT the other day for not phrasing my prompt very well. That makes no logical sense, but it was kind of ingrained in me growing up to like be the peacemaker all the time. So I would apologize. And I'm not saying apologies are bad, but sometimes when you apologize, you're taking ownership of their feelings or taking responsibility for the conflict or whatever is going on. So an affirmation is different than like an apology. It's kind of just a statement. So I've kind of tried to switch over from saying like I'm sorry that happened to you, just to saying that's hard. Because I'm sorry kind of puts it on me, it takes ownership of it, and just saying that's hard. So these are some ideas. I've even sometimes put them on like a post-it note if I'm preparing myself for a hard conversation. It's just like kind of saying it over again, like that's hard. That's tough. And thank you, Jocelyn. I grew up in the South, actually, so that constant apologizing is a very Southern thing too, as well. I'll say there's certain parts of the country there, but I learned that I was actually causing some problems with the teens. Like I am the adult figure in their life, and I'm apologizing to them, and it causes kind of causes some confusing dynamics. So I tried to shift over to just that empathetic statement instead of an apology. So if you have a go-to one that you like, please tell me. Sometimes I just say that sucks. And think about it. Like maybe you're venting to a friend, you've had a hard day, and then you're like, this happened, and the friend's like, oh my gosh, that sounds horrible. You should do this. And then you're like, I didn't really necessarily want that. Sometimes you just want to be listened to. And when teens, especially as they transition from school to to the after school, they're dealing with all these, they're kind of buzzy, they're like that live wire feeling there. Giving them a space to just listen and calm down helps a bit too. So put it on a post-it or next to your desk there. And with that empathetic statement, another kind of technique in verbal judo is paraphrasing. As I said, sometimes we want to fix it or make a snap judgment, but part of the judo piece, this calming down, is just that listening and repetition. When you ask someone to share their story or summarize or you ask these open-ended questions, it kind of just brings it down a little bit. But sometimes we have to stop, and this is also hard for the southerner in me to interrupt. But sometimes you need to say, "Hey, wait, I wanna understand what you're saying. Can I stop you? It sounds like school was hard today. It sounds like this happened, and I'm coming at it as a question because no one likes to be told their feelings. No one wants to be like, you seem mad. I'm not mad. Like that can escalate as well. Or it sounds like she did that to you. No, let them explain what's happening because that can create this defensiveness. And then you're arguing about something completely different than whatever it is. So let them, you can be empathetic. That sounds hard, but you give them a chance to kind of explain what's bothering to them. Then you paraphrase and then give them a chance to correct you. So yeah, this active listening, they use this in like marriage therapy and other kind of things. Like someone active listens back and forth. It is hard sometimes to sit there and be like, oh wow, that's a lot, but you got to listen there, and then you do it again. And if you are incorrect, if you say, okay, if I understand correctly, she said something bad about you to this friend, and then they can go, oh no, 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 that didn't happen. Then you can start it over again. And the process of just explaining it, and law enforcement does this too, like in interviewing, it's a very calm. Hey, let's not. It's like the good cop, bad cop thing is more in the movies sometimes. Really often they're trying to de-escalate the situation, have someone calm down, and they ask a lot of calm, open-ended questions, and have that empathetic statement to get them to calm down a little bit. One thing with teens is a lot of this happens, things happen online, things happen at school, and they get dragged into the library. So you are dealing with like a conflict that's 3 weeks old that happened on Snapchat, and you don't have context for any of that. You only know that what's presented in front of you. So if we start making snap judgments and blah, 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 then we're going to lose that bit of that trust, and just giving them a chance to explain helps. But it's hard because something's happening. You don't always know about it. I remember some days the kids would be like extra on their phones, and I'm like, something went down today, but I'm dealing with the consequences. Try to figure out a little bit what's going on. And being careful when we have these conversations, because as I said, that emotional center of their brain is really highly attuned, that we need to be careful on our tone, keep that calm level area. And very, very important, this is just in life, not just with teens. Don't, there's always an exception to always, and never say never. Because so we feel this way, right? Like someone comes in, it's a group of teens, you're like, oh my gosh, it's them again. And you just want to be like, you always are so loud after school because it feels that way. But now you've set up a situation where they're going to get defenses and they're going to be like, well, last Tuesday we were just fine. And then you're getting into a different type of argument. So we try not to engage in like hyperbole exaggerations, maybe just have that statement instead of like a judgment. Hey, today it's been loud. Not say you've always been loud, but like today you're noisy. Giving them that chance there. So we're also going to try to say that I feel words, open-ended questions. This is good advice with everyone, but know that teens can get extra defensive because of the peer pressure element and because of where their brains are if they feel attacked or they feel they have to defend themselves in the group too. And part of this is also giving them autonomy, especially because I worked a lot in secure care facilities at the adult and juvenile level. They don't have a lot of choices. You have to go here at this time, you have to do this, you have to do this. And I found that in a classroom setting, even giving them a choice of where to sit or a choice of what group to do or a choice of this assignment versus this assignment really helps the dynamic in the class because they don't always have a lot of choices, and it's an issue of respect. Like I am showing you respect by giving you some choices. Now, maybe your choices are you need to leave the library or be quiet. That's your choice. But when I phrase it as an option or consequences, it gives a little bit of that respect and power back to them that can help them calm down a little bit. But it connects the consequences to the behavior. If you go in, judge, jury, and executioner, and just say, hey, this is going on, boom, done, then you didn't give them that choice, and they might not understand what they're in trouble for because in their brain they were like, we weren't loud, we weren't doing anything, what is she going on about? So you have to connect the two. This is what happened, so this is the consequence. The same thing you do in parenting. So trying to give those options and consequences. Now, to be fair, there are certain times you don't give options and consequences, you ask them to leave. But a lot of the situations that are going on, they're just being like noisy, they're just goofing off, they're doing whatever. Then you give them those choices. And then, yeah, realistic consequences too. But sometimes you do need to ask them to leave, and sometimes it's just, most of the time when I've kicked out teens, it's just for the day. But there are maybe certain situations, and you'll have to check your own library policies where it needs to be longer, or there needs to be something else, and we'll talk about the policies in a bit. This is hard. I find that it gets a little bit easier, but it never was easy, I would say, for asking a teenager to leave. I don't enjoy it. And so when we talk about this, it's like our brains go into confrontation mode, and sometimes we hype ourselves out of this, and it can be hard. So just if you go in here recognizing that this is not going to be fun, this is going to be hard, we are not trying to feel better. This is going to be stressful. So just I say this, and I also say this because you aren't always aware that of the impacts on other patrons and teens. I've had a number of occasions where I kicked out a teen and it was stressful and it's not fun, but I would have someone maybe approach me, sometimes even another teen or a patron, thank me for doing that. They didn't want to speak up in that situation, but the library is for everybody. And if we allow certain situations to go on too long, we're not providing the best service for others around us. And this is hard. This is like this. The line might be different for other people of what where is that line of kicking out? But recognize this is not just about this individual person. This is about the library atmosphere as a whole, especially if you're in a smaller library or like a big open air library where everyone can hear everything. This causes stress to the bystanders too. So maybe what you're doing, it sucks, but it actually might have a greater good situation on top of it as well. So if I'm going to ask someone, and I just put patron, this is not just a library. This is my very unscientific list of steps that I just figured out over the years. So what I learned the hard way is that I start with the day. And so the day means you're not welcome back to the end of the day, but I always say, you're welcome to come back tomorrow. And if I can, and I try to catch that teen the next day by, when they come in and I welcome them back. That's kind of part of that process if you can. If you can learn their names, that helps too. They will listen more when they know their names. They also know that they're on their radar a little bit. They don't always like to tell you their names sometimes. I found that yearbooks are helpful with that situation, but if you can use their name, hey, Jackie, you need to leave for the day. You're welcome. And then the next day, hey, Jackie, glad to have you here. Just real simple, make sure that they know you're watching, they know you acknowledge them and ask them to go. Another issue that I found is that sometimes they're sneaky, and sometimes, if your library is open to 8, 9, or later, that's a long time from after school. They'll just sneak back in, and if the other staff don't know what happened, they might like another shift or other people come. They don't know that, and they'll just come back in. So making sure that you go around all the staff, not just the librarians, but the circulation staff, shelvers, all of them. This person has to leave for the day. You're not necessarily asking those other staff to handle it, but they need to be aware and someone needs to say, hey, you have to go. So that they sneak in sometimes, which it makes me kind of happy that they love being at the library so much, but they still have to go for the day. Um, this is part of the empathetic statement. We're trying to activate that because they can appear a little bit selfish, is that the library is a space for everyone. This is not personal. Now, it might feel personal to them. And that's when I've had some name callings like, you just hate this, you just hate me. I try to emphasize it's a space for everyone and that we're all in this one space and sharing this one space together. If you do need to escalate it, if they refuse to go, remind them they may be trespassing. We did have law enforcement a lot of times after school, but I did not want to get law enforcement involved. The consequences need to come from the library staff because sometimes if you do have people, security on staff, they rotate in and out. You are the regular presence there. You are the person they know. The behavior and the consequences need to come from you, not law enforcement, unless it really, really escalates. That should be like a last resort because you want them to connect their library behavior with the librarian, not that it's a criminal behavior. So remind them that they're trespassing. If you have a number like a non-emergency number, put that by your phone so you're not cluttering it up. Maybe you don't have a non-emergency number, but call it. I have done this thing before to kind of like threaten the teens. So it's like, this is my phone app. I'll just be like, I'll be like, slowly, and they can see me. I'm like, I'm not bluffing here, and I'll do it. But don't say you're gonna do it if not do it. But I might slowly reach up the phone so they can see it, and they know I'm serious. Remind them of the rule they broke, then welcome them back the next day. And Kathy, I appreciate you saying like, yeah, I always try to listen to what other teens called them, and sometimes you got a nickname. That's true. I've had kids give me false names, and then even after I learn the name, I'll give them the false names to troll them a little bit, and they find that amusing. But this is hard with the patron to leave. Sometimes they want to have a really grand exit. I find for the most part, unless it's like slamming or dangerous, I usually let some of that go. Let them have they need to preserve their honor or dignity in front of their other friends. I let it go. But if they are making a big deal, like they're slamming stuff or like knocking something down, which I've had before, we're like, okay, well, now that's 2 days. Now that's 3 days. Now that's like I will add to it on that because we need to leave. And also you need to leave the property entirely. So I've had incidences of they'll just be hang out in the parking lot or they just hang out in like the lobby area. I've also had kids say, well, you can't kick me out. I got to wait till my mom comes. That's not your problem. You're not their babysitter. Oh, I can't do that. It's raining. Not my problem also. So don't make the rain or the snow or the lack of picking up your problem. They walk to the library, they can walk somewhere else. Sometimes I would be like, hey, there's a park down the street. You can go over there. You can't stay here. But don't let that stop the discipline there too. So if you had any steps from doing this, I'll recognize it's hard. This is usually when I get called names, is they're doing their grand exit and they let out some names, and if they curse at me, they get more time because that's not appropriate behavior. And it's not personal, although it does kind of wear you out. Yeah, I do struggle with that too, and it's a sub-zero range. I have had when it was real bad one time, we had a staff member sit on the porch and we had them call their caregiver to pick them up and we they had to stand on like the porch area where it wasn't as cold. So we did that. That was kind of but that we only did that like when it was really bad. And because I'm in Utah, so it's actually can get rough like just like Michigan can. But I really try not to because the consequences need to match the actions there. And they often are in walking distance. We're the neighborhood library and they have friends or someone who can pick them up. So it sucks. It sucks though. And you'll want to sometimes break your own rules, but when you do that once, it becomes harder to enforce the rule the second time. When we're talking about this, and as I'm going to segue into policies and guidelines, I want to emphasize, and I'll emphasize this again, it's consistency, consistency, consistency. They recognize emotions very well. They're watching everyone around them. That person got treated this way. I got treated this way. I got treated this way. They know if there's favorites or something else going on, and you undermine your own policies when you are inconsistent with some of that behavior. That doesn't mean you don't have to be empathetic and you don't have to be kind and you don't have to do any of that, but it is harder to enforce the behavior when it's haphazard. And this is also why I would try to designate someone maybe you or just a couple people that do this part of it, asking someone to leave. So there's that consistency in the way it's handled as well. Because some people don't really want to do this and some people shouldn't do this. And we'll talk about that a little bit there too. So yeah, and thanks you for your comments, Robert. And if anyone has any comments or questions before we go more into policies and guidelines, I'd love to hear that. Yeah, I've had a parent mad at me about kicking their kid out. Yeah. I I am not their parent. This is not a child care. We actually had policies around that you could not be attended 14 and below. Let's be honest, we didn't enforce those too hard, but we could turn back to that policy if we needed to about unintended children. I don't know if you have an unattended child policy, but that is something you could say. We also had issues with the 13-year-old watching the 8-year-old watching the 6-year-old watching the 4-year-old. And that's also something that has to be brought up with the parent. But yeah, so you have age 9. So everyone has different policies on that, but that's something you could go to if a parent is upset. But at the end of the day, it's a space for everyone. And I try to have the same language with the parent. We're like, yeah, that sucks. That's that empathetic statement. That's hard. I'm sure that was hard to have to leave work to do that. But the library is a space for everyone, and we enforce the rules consistently. And they might be mad. They might be mad, yeah. But yeah, see your own policies, and I don't know your own. Kathy might want to weigh in on some of this section if there's something specific to unattended child or behavior or whatever it is. But this is hard, especially for teens, because teens not only are their brains all over the place, is that they have different rules for every place they go in their life. I mean, you have some teens that have jobs and helping support the family, or they're watching their other siblings and they're making dinner and they're like taking on these adult responsibilities. You have some kids that don't have any of those adult responsibilities. And we have culturally, biologically, all of it, we have different kind of markers, I guess legally, of what adulthood is. So when you get these teens, they're going to have different rules at their school and different rules than at home, different rules at their grandma's house. And so giving that empathy, having that empathy is helpful, and being consistent is extra important because the rules change so much. There's also different laws around curfews in different places, and private spaces might have this rules. This has different rules. It is confusing when you have all these different rules being thrown at you by different adults, especially when you are taking on adult responsibilities. So keeping that in mind as we talk about policies, that consistency piece, and that they might not understand what the rules are. And yeah, Kathy says, and having policies consistent across the branches. Just like the example I gave of a teen saying, "Hey, well, we weren't loud last Tuesday. We were not always loud." A teen or a patron might also be like, "Well, that library lets me do that. Why can't I do that here?" And that might be a way that they can push back on you too. Yeah, and that's what Robert, that's a good point. That's what my kid told me. Yeah, that's probably true. And I appreciate you, Daisy, bringing up the parents come in and talk to them. And I've had a lot of understanding parents. I've had a few angry parents. You don't know what you're going to get sometimes with parents there too. And yes, there can be parents telling different stories. I've also had incidences where parents would call regularly to check on if their kids were hanging out with other kids and they didn't want them to do this or be a, and so I don't want to get involved in that either. Like I am not going to monitor your child's friendships or whatever they're going to this program. And I had a parent be like, is this other kid at this program? Like I'm not going to tell you about other people's children in the library too. So you'll also have to create these boundaries with parents too, and they're not always happy about that as well. But that's not, you're not a daycare, you're not a child care provider, and that's not your role either there too. But yes, it's a teens is a time of transition, and this ambiguity relates to what we were talking about being developmentally appropriate. Is hormonally they're dealing with a lot, but I try, as a general rule, to treat teens with respect and kind of treat them higher, like at an older age, and because often they rise to the occasion, and when you treat someone with respect, they often respond with respect. Not always. You treat adult with respect, they might act like a child. You just don't always know. But recognizing that they might be having some adult responsibilities at home, and trying to give them the opportunity to rise up to those policies. I might say something like, I know you can do this. Hey, last week you were really great in that program. I know you got this. You have to leave for the day, but I know you got this. You're welcome to come back tomorrow, and kind of have that empowering language is a way to kind of talk about this. You're recognizing that you're still having the consequences for their actions, but you can recognize when they also behave well, and you can recognize that sometimes it's hard to do that. So you might have different rules too, in your teen area versus your program area versus the larger library. So that can be confusing to teens too. So kind of clarifying on that consistency is a lot. And you also might want to have digital rules online if you're running like different groups for teens. I ran different online groups, or you have online programs, is being very clear about those rules too. They are often exposed to adult content. You don't want them exposed in the library. You want to reinforce those rules, even if in the other parts of the web they are not behaving there too. So this is a time of transition for sure. And I appreciate the comments there. Yeah, when parents, and Robert met adding that when parents have pushed back so far, it's due because they didn't have a place for their kid after school. Yeah, it is tough, and I have sympathy. And this especially can be an issue in the summer. We would have kids all day during the summer, kind of almost like a child care facility, and it was hard. It was tough. And I have some empathy, but my empathy can't make it an unfair place for other people. It's hard, and I'm glad you mentioned carefully, Kathy. Don't give other people's information or share that. But yeah, I would have parents all sometimes calling about their kids, and you have to draw a firm line there too. Um, so when we're talking about these teens, recognizing where they are biologically, with their hormones, with just societal wise, is like if you do have teen programs, have them involved in creating the policy. I ran an anime club for 8 years, and I would say those teens enforced the rules more than I did sometimes because that was their space and they really wanted their space a certain way. They were very inclusive and welcoming, but they also would not tolerate certain behavior. So they would help some set some of the program rules. So maybe there's an area that you have in the library that they can help be involved. When they are more involved, that shows that respect. It gives them that autonomy, those choices, but also those choices come with responsibility. So if you all agree that we are doing this, then we also need to enforce it. Now, I understand you can't do that in the general library. I mean, but in maybe certain areas, if they can get involved. I might I'm not going to enforce the rules differently between a 13 and a 15-year-old, but I might give that 13-year-old an extra warning. I might try to explain the rules a little bit more than the 13-year-old, than the 16-year-old or whatever. But there is a big difference between you've seen this probably if you work with teens, there's a big difference between a seventh grader and a 10th grader. It's almost like they're different humans. They're also like a foot difference. They're taller. There's a lot of maturity that happens in those years. So you might have a little more patience or a little more warnings with like the tweens and the middle schoolers versus the high schoolers. When I had kids that are high schoolers, I was like, you've been coming here for 4 years. You know the rules. I would just be like, you gotta go, you know. But a 13-year-old who's still kind of new to this, I might be a little more patient. And then you can also consider restitution. We ran peer courts. We also would do volunteering. I had a lot of story time prep to do over the years. That was a way to kind of get them back. So it's hard to ask them to leave for a long time just because of where their brains are. But you can maybe you kick them out for like a couple of days if there's a bigger offense, and then you say, well, before you come back, we're gonna have you. We want you to do some tasks. If maybe there was an issue of vandalism, then that restitution could be part of it. That they can be certain number of hours. Now that's extra work from the staff. I understand, but it can be a great way to have them connect to their community and recognize the consequences of their behavior through that restitution process. I'll say again, consistency is key. I would usually have at the beginning of every semester a short teen orientation where I'd bribe them. I would buy candy and stuff to bribe them in there. But it would be like 10, 15 minutes. I'm like, hey, y'all, listen up real quick. I know you've had a long day. I got candy bars over here, but you got to stay to the end. Have them sign in. And I would do a quick orientation every semester. I would sometimes I would let it go in the summer because summer was kind of all over the place, but that helped a bit. I wouldn't say it didn't solve all the problems, but I also could be like, hey, John, you were at the orientation. I know we went over this with you. I'm gonna remind you, and next time you gotta leave for the day. Like it would help also when I was trying to discipline behavior because I told you this. You were aware of this. You signed this. I have a Twix bar as wrapper as evidence that you were there. So that helps a bit. But I'll also emphasize, especially kids who maybe have experienced trauma or other things in their life, consistency equals safety. They know what to expect when they walk in the doors. And when you're walking and your life is just, oh, like it's crazy at home or it's crazy over here, you have one place in your life that's consistent and safe that helps. And that consistency also means putting the policies and consequences consistently too. But it can make them feel more comfortable. If the rules are changing all the time, that's very uncomfortable and hard. Um, so, along with the policies, making sure the staff is on board, and I'm going to share a story in a minute about that. What are your non-negotiables? And I don't know what your policies are. In my opinion, when it starts getting to, vandalism or if there is like really, we were very not very tolerant on bullying or any physical aggression or definitely no vandalism at all. We were strict on those. Those were non-negotiables. I'm not giving you a warning if I see you with a Sharpie at the couch. I'm not warning you anymore. But some of the other stuff, like maybe noise or just being rowdy, case by case basis. And but that's something the staff needs to figure out because if the staff isn't on board with the policies or don't even know the policies, maybe they don't even know the rules, then that consistency is not going to happen. So at staff meetings, having a time to look at this, because so often what happens, right, it comes from on top, it filters down, but it doesn't quite filter down to everyone. And everyone also means the frontline staff, like the circulation staff, a shelver. They are all involved. A team doesn't know much between a shelver and a librarian. They just see you as a library staff member. So they need to be aware of the rules as well. And this can be a problem with that consistency because we have these gray areas. So enforcement is the eye of the beholder. We had a lot of issues because we were a big open air. We've got a new library since then, but a big open air library. The noise carried far. Yes, there was a teen area and a program room, but when you're in a big room, noise is an issue. And our staff had different levels of tolerance for noise. I had a pretty high tolerance for noise. Maybe being a teen librarian was like made for me because I had a high tolerance for that. But not everyone did, and there's not a right or wrong here, I guess. But there needs to be an agreement of what that looks like. So it became to be a conflict between the staff because I had another staff member who didn't have the high tolerance, and she's like, Carrie is like not enforcing the rules. Why isn't Carrie enforcing the rules? That's her job. Why isn't she handling those teens? And then patrons also have different ideas of what that noise policy is. So this was creating resentments and staff morale issues because some of the staff perceived me as unenforcing the rules, and I thought they were overreacting. So we're having this conflict. So we kind of had to come together as a staff and figure out what is our tolerable level, and we had to let a lot of the after school, what we finally decided is at 3 to 5 p.m. time, we let most of it go. We didn't enforce noise unless it was actively yelling or screaming. It was just too much. And that where I was feeling a lot of stress because I felt like it was just noisy. You've got 100 kids in here. Of course it's going to be noisy. I don't want to be running around for 2 hours telling people to be quiet. We got to allow a little bit here too. But I also understand the frustration of the other staff of like, well, we have these rules. Why is no one enforcing it? So whatever you decide, make sure you're clear. Maybe the 3 to 5, letting it go is the way to do it. But then we also would tell other patrons to come from like 10 to 12. It's quiet. Come at this time. It's hard. Just be on the same page no matter what. I hadn't thought of decibel meters. That's a very scientific way to figure out the noise there too. Um, but it is a perception. It's a gray area, and it's hard on staff and morale, especially if maybe someone's doing something outside their job description or they're not really suited to. As I've said, there can be some situations where it can, I don't want to say the word violent, but it can be very stressful and confrontational, kicking someone out. There's some unpredictability there, especially if you're dealing with mentally ill or whatever. It can be kind of scary and anxiety inducing, and you don't want that to fall only on one person on your staff. That's a lot. Now, if you have a small staff, maybe that's all you can do, but recognize that this takes a toll on staff. Maybe it's not best for everyone, and recognize that if there is not consistent enforcement of these policies, those teens pick that up. They're noticing that they're going to play the staff against each other, and you don't want that either. Um, Also allowing some time to take a break. If I got into a confrontation with a teen, I need 15 minutes. I need 15 minutes to go in the back. Just can you give me a minute? Because sometimes I need to calm myself down. So also recognizing that staff sometimes needs a break from that so we don't get burnout there too. So if we can change the environment, that helps. I mean, we can't solve everything, but just having better sight lines, just restructuring how the room is around, it helps a little bit. So we added some mirrors, we had security cameras that helped a bit. Just being aware that there was a camera there was a deterrent, what helps. So look around your environment. Are there certain places where incidents are happening or there's a noise level issue? If you can separate the areas, I understand this is sometimes out of your control, but really our environment affects our behavior. If it's noisy, the kids are more likely to be noisy. If they're quiet, they're more likely to be quiet. They look around them, they match the behavior. If all the other kids are jumping off the retaining wall, they're going to jump off the retaining wall as well. don't have a retaining wall anymore. So changing the environment can help with all of this. And it is hard to be in one space. You're kind of like a spotlight on you all the time. And if you're not getting a break, then you can't also de-escalate and be who those teens need to be as well. So this last short part, and then I'd love to open it up for some questions. This part's a little shorter, but involving partners, you don't have to do it all on your own. I learned a lot from social workers and law enforcement and others on how to de-escalate and handle things. And there's some a variety of different partners. I'll suggest some, if you have any, especially some local Michigan ones to put in there, put it in the chat because a lot of these behaviors come from issues, from deep-seated issues that you are not in control over. It's hard. They bring a backpack full of their trauma and issues to the library. It's not reflective of you. I cannot solve some of these things, but I can try to change my environment and my mindset and my attitude to make it a safer place. So I did a lot of partnering with youth services, our county and state youth services, and there's a National Safe Place organization. We had some incidences where we needed to call in an emergency counselor, and it was like a phone call away. That was nice to have. So we had a designated safe place there. We also, a lot of our behavioral issues were the high poverty area. The kids were hungry. When you're hungry, you get cranky too. So we started a new program. We were the first on our state to start a program for to feed the children. So we partnered with the food bank and we had after school snacks. And so I think there's like a I don't know, dozen, 15 more libraries doing it now. But we got that set up, and as I said, it didn't solve all the problems. But when the kids that were often there till 8, 9 p.m. till their parents got back from work, because often they were working a second job or there wasn't anyone at home, at least they had something because they would eat like lunch at like 11 a.m. By the time they got there at like 3:30, they're hungry. They're hungry. And so some of these behavior incidences were exacerbated by the hunger they were feeling. Now, the rat situation was another one. That caused another problem, but it did help with the teen behavior because we're addressing the root causes here. There are a lot of different partnerships you can have. I know there's a lot of the funding that's been cut with Planned Parenthood lately, but they had a really wonderful tween. They had some relationship classes, they had puberty discussions, they had some teen councils that would meet. They were a really, really great partner for us for a lot of their services to adolescents there too. Please put some links if you have other ones that you recommend. I mentioned restitution earlier when we were talking about policies. Having some partnerships with the teen court or other volunteer programs was helpful. It just helped them connect to the space better. We did on an anniversary, we did this big mural project where the teens would help paint a mural on that retaining wall that they kept jumping off of it. That also helped them from jumping off the retaining wall. But it also helped them connect with the library, that this is our library, this is our community, this is our space. That restitution volunteering creates that ownership there and gives them an opportunities. So there's some links as well that you can look into, and maybe you have some that you want to suggest. We would sometimes have Volunteers of America come out. We also would have stacks of things that we'd pass out, but yeah. So Robert, there's a federal snack program. Certain high poverty areas can qualify for it, and you can only allow it about half an hour. And then if any food is not, you can only have it 18 and younger. And after that, we could put the food out and other people could take it home. And it was gone most of the time. So they would come about once a week. We would store it in the back room and then we would have it out. We had to do some kind of educational activity, but we determined that being at the library and having books was pretty educational just being there. So we qualified for that. So there are some rules with that federal funding, but that was how it worked, that there was only a certain period of time you could pass it out, 18 and below. After that, though, you could put it in a bowl and anyone could take it home. So yes, it was a snack program, not the full meal. With the full meal, I think you need some additional equipment and setup on that. So yes, please, great questions. And I want to reiterate as we wrap up here that this is hard. Don't go in there with the idea of a quiet library. I haven't been in a quiet library very often myself, but that you're trying to make a safe and consistent space for everyone. It does get a little bit easier. It never gets easy. And I appreciate all that all that you do for sure. This is not easy stuff. So thank you. Well, good. I thought we could give some time for questions, Kathy. And if you have any comments or things that you want to add, especially I know you know the policies and some partners.
Well, thank you, Carrie, so much for sharing your experiences and your practices around managing teens after school. There is a survey in the chat, so feel free to click on that and respond. That helps support webinars and trainings like this one today through the Institute of Museum and Library Services. Um, and I guess I'm just going to open it up to questions. I did get one direct chat. It wasn't much of a question, but kind of a statement that they have 100 plus students on half days here. It gets very loud, but they have a hard time asking them to quiet down because they also have small children in the library on those days being very loud and parents aren't shushing their children. They also have some special needs groups that come in and are loud. So any thoughts or ideas on finding a balance on those half days?
I mean that's hard, and we were trying, as I was telling that story about noise, we were trying to find some compromises, and the best solution that we came up with as a staff is just kind of letting it go. Unless it was active screaming or yelling or curse words, like it was like a loud curse word, we would police that a little bit more, if that makes sense. Like if we felt like
Mhm.
there was bullying or curse words, we let the noise go, and then we would tell patrons, especially our adult patrons who were like looking for jobs or researching, hey, these are the hours that are best. And we try to warn them because we had complaints. We had complaints from some of the other patrons, and we're like, yeah, I know it's tough. It's a space for everyone. We appreciate your feedback. We recommend these times if you can.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess that's what I'm saying is it's hard to create a policy that's going to fit everyone. You just pick your non-negotiables, which is like screaming curse words was a non-negotiable, right? And we let the rest go. And it actually was less stress for the staff. It was a big stress for me personally to police that. And I felt like I was being taken away from other duties because I spent so much time policing the noise that I couldn't provide the other level of customer service that I wanted to. So you have to weigh that too. It's hard. It's hard though.
Yeah, and I know some larger libraries, if they have the space, they will make quiet areas.
Yeah, if
And
you
instead
can,
of,
that's great.
yeah, instead of teen rooms, they've got quiet areas.
Mhm.
So we have a couple other questions in the chat. I think kind of tying into that loud noise is the what are inappropriate conversations of topic? And I know a lot of libraries also deal with like what is displaying, what YouTube videos are they watching, and
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
topics and viewing. Um,
And that's partly an environmental issue. I do feel like when you put the sliders up, there's more privacy and it can cause a stress. But also when you have the sliders up, it's less visible what they're looking at, if that makes sense. So we would have a lot of rovers that would kind of monitor that because yeah, there were some incidences of pornography just being just played on the screens in front of children. And if they knew that you were roving, they were less likely to try it. I think if they had more of a private place, they might not have been aware. But that is something to keep in mind when you have all of them in one space. If you can, we had some children's computers, but of course, usually most of the computers are in one place and you have adults and everyone handling that. But roving helps. Just if they know someone's walking around, that could help a little bit. But there should be no tolerance for that. We had to call law enforcement one time. So
yeah. And then appropriate topics as well, like that they're if they're sitting at tables or
yeah.
I think the
So
roving might work with that as well.
it does, and honestly, so I'm 6 foot tall. I'm very tall, and so I would literally just stand sometimes. I'm like this imposing presence. We also had another staff member that was quite tall. Sometimes you don't always need to say something, but your just physical presence there helps. But we had some also lower tolerance on the bullying. Gang activities. We had some gang activity around the area, so we didn't have as much tolerance for that or any talk of violence at that. But your library has their own non-negotiables, and as long as you agree on those and they're acted consistently, I don't see that there's a right or wrong on what you should do. So, but
Okay.
yeah, it's a hard one. It's I think that you should talk as a staff on that one. At least it's consist so it's consistent. because they'll
Right.
play each other off of each other. Like I can get away with Kathy, or I get away with Carrie and not Kathy. They'll know.
They do. They do. And it shouldn't be all on,
Mhm.
Kathy
Yeah. Yeah.
or
Everybody's gonna get
Carrie.
burnt out.
Yep. Everett has a question about the sides of listening to teens. Um, and speaking about empathetic conversation style. Um, Not sure how our teens are quiet when trying to, or excuse me, not sure how to cause our teens this. I'm sorry, I think we had a couple of typos in that. Not quite sure what you're asking there, Everett. But do you, Carrie, have a prompt with a question
Mhm.
to get them to have more conversation with you, I think is what Everett's
Yeah.
asking.
And I would say, and I would start with the nonverbal. So as I mentioned, I'm very tall. I would actually go down to their level sometimes and crouch and try to have a quieter voice, right? Especially if I'm going to talk to them privately, I don't want to do it in front of their friends, if that makes sense. That makes them maybe a little more receptive and not as threatening sometimes. So I'd start with that, and then I'd be like, "Hey, did you know that your voice is loud and I can and I would kind of be like, look around. I try to start with a question at first. If it happens again, I'm not going to lean down and I'm going to hover over you and say it more directly. So also being aware of our nonverbal body language, of our heights and differences, and our kids are going to respond differently. I'll say it up front. Our male librarians got a different response than our female librarians, so that might be something that you keep in mind when you're engaging in these conversations, too. But if you can, on the first, I try to get down to their level, talk in a quieter voice, ask them an open question, give them the chance to say, they might not even know. They might be like, oh, wow, especially because I wear headphones a lot and they talk really loud because they're literally wearing their headphones and having a conversation. So I try to give them a benefit of the doubt and then go from there. Your teens are quiet. Oh, that's the same. Yeah, the teens are quiet. That's great. So, although maybe that's
At
not great,
least,
but we want to talk more.
yeah, they might be quiet towards the adults, right?
Yeah.
When they see you coming, exactly. Yep. And that's part of like getting to know their names, and being approachable. I really like Carrie, your suggestion on the day after they've been kicked out to look for them or in the days after, and to welcome them back in. I think
Yeah.
that's really important.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Other advice that you give, Kathy, are things that you're seeing.
I used to work at a library that was next door to the high school and the middle school, and so definitely been through
So
it all.
I will
Yep.
say middle school is like, in my opinion, like 5 times harder than high school.
Yep.
That age.
Yeah. Everett's asking about one-on-ones, separating them, that when you're speaking to them when they've misbehaved.
Yeah, what I would sometimes try to do, be like, hey, I have a question. I just need to talk to you for a second. And I wouldn't say like what I'm talking about, and I would try to go in with like a neutral tone and pull them away. That's how I would try to approach it there. If I do see them in a group, but sometimes in a group, if they're just kind of being noisy and blah, 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 I'm just like, you're all done for the day here. There too. I'm not going to police who did what or whatever any of that is. Yeah. No,
Awesome.
great. No, I appreciate your partnering with your middle school. I would actually regularly attend middle meetings with the middle school leadership and to see what was going on. And it was interesting because we all knew the same kids. Like, if you have a problem with that kid at your library, they probably know about it at the middle school. So it was
Yep.
kind of helpful to get that perspective and know what they were doing.
I know some libraries have had the principals in and whatnot after school just to kind of, roam and see, what's happening and get to know staff as well. So definitely being engaged with the staff at the school and sharing communication. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Teens that ignore you.
Yeah. I
That's
mean, I can see that. So if I don't know if you're saying that like it's like they can't pretend that you're talking to them or they're just like not responding to you. I don't know if you're saying that you're ignoring they hear you but they're ignoring you or they're just completely not looking at you. That's a sign of like that disrespect. I mean, I would handle it. You give them that warning. They want to ignore you then, you come back, they're not going to ignore you anymore. Um, if it becomes a situation where they continue to ignore you, that's when you're like, well, I asked you to go, now you're trespassing.
Yeah.
And that might do it.
And I think the key thing there is making sure that your board and your administration has your back on that.
Yeah.
They really need to be supporting you with the policies and with the actions that you might need to take if it does come down to calling the police. Um, you know, that the policies are in place to do that and to back it up. I know it's hard sometimes, but sometimes we have to remember that being physically in the library, um, your behavior, it's a privilege to be in that library. It's a privilege. Um, you need to follow the policies. So if your board and your administration is not supportive, what are some ideas that, maybe we can brainstorm and group share here to get them on board on, to understand what you're facing on a daily uh, situation.
Yeah.
I think,
Ideally, they should come after school too and,
yeah,
and actually witness it, frankly.
yep,
Um, but I'd be interested in what other people have to recommend because sometimes in administration they're a little more separate or it's been 10, 20 years since they've worked with teens and it's changed or it looks different and they might not have that perspective. But
yep.
that's a key point. You need to have that support. Oh, great. If anyone has comments or questions? Okay.
Um, I'm not seeing any more questions. I just realized it's a couple
Yeah,
minutes
we're
after
after the
three.
hour, so we
Oh my
probably
gosh.
lost some people. But please reach out. I put my email up here, and then Kathy's there for you as well, of course, and you'll get the slides.
Yes, and we'll send out the recording as well. So thank you everyone for being here today. Sorry we kept you a few minutes long.
Sorry, I lost track of time too. That was on me. I appreciate the questions and thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Carrie, so much for being here with us today.
Thank you.